And my topic is going to be payola. Would you be gracious?
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. The term payola was derived from a combination of the word pay and the word ola. Like in my day, we called it the Victrola, Crayola crayons, and so forth. So there was always an ola at the end of it for some reason. And then it's a form of a payoff. So they coined the term. And it's difficult to determine just when this came into effect, but from research, it would appear that it started. It was a reaction of what they called the good old boys, the old Tin Pan Alley days of music, as opposed to the new kids on the block and rock and roll and so forth. In the 40s, most record promotion popularity was, record sales were determined by jukeboxes. That's how you gauge things. Enter American radio of the 50s, where independent record indies, which were independent labels. In the 50s, there was approximately 250 disc jockeys in the U.S. Can we move? Can we move it? This is one that I'm going to go through a whole bunch of some of the culprits in this payola. Murray the K was one. He was called Murray Kaufman. I did a show with him in Connecticut with the Belmonts without Dion. I met Dion on the road, by the way. I think I was higher than he was, but that's another story. This is Alan Freed, and he's one of the superstars of the payola scandal. Another one was Dick Clark. Now, Dick Clark was liked because he had a pure image. But Alan Freed was associated, don't kill the messenger, but Alan Freed was associated with African Americans, which wasn't popular in that day. So he was arrogant, and they say he was a cigarette smoker, a chain smoker. Why that has any significance is beyond me. But he was one of the ones that were involved. Now, as the story goes, I'm improvising now. I'm not even using my notes because I can do a lot of this from memory. Dick Clark got away with it because he divested himself of his record company. He owned a record. In fact, he was more of a goner for a thief than this Alan Freed was. Alan Freed was just a DJ that got paid off for playing records. So did Dick Clark. But Dick Clark was a lovable image. You folks here are too young to remember American Bandstand. But there was a show where you rushed home from high school to watch the teenagers dance, and you even had crushes. I had a crush on Patty. There was a girl named Patty on the show. Dick Clark got away with it. And if you looked into his record, you almost wouldn't know that he was so much involved with the scandal. Now, but Alan Freed got fired because he was sort of a renegade type guy that was introducing this music. He coined the term rock and roll. So they say. The black community would argue that point and say it wasn't him. So he was never a liked guy, but he was a very talented guy, and he was responsible for all African American acts of the 50s. All these songs that you see on television now, that of the old rock and roll, that's Alan Freed's doing. But he died disgraced and broke. Now I'll refer to some of my notes. I gave you some of the background. Okay, there was approximately 250 disc jockeys, where there was a typical deal where a disc jockey would get approximately $50 a week to play certain records. Payola, if you announce it to the radio station that you're doing, you could put it in every major newspaper. It was the point that they didn't announce it. They did it under the table. I did too, trying to get a record played. Didn't work for me, but it worked for some managers and artists. They got a record played. So in, I believe, the early 60s, I'm going on memory, I'm doing pretty good on memory here. In the 60s, they had a congressional hearing where they brought all these different disc jockeys in, and there was crazy fines, thousands and thousands of dollars. Some of the major companies like Sony and those companies got sued in the millions. It amounted to millions of dollars. And let me go. This is Dick Bart. You can see the image. He looks beautiful. You would never suspect that he was corrupt. He had such a clean image. This is Alan Freed. He was one of my heroes because he introduced music and he introduced rock and roll, and I had a rock and roll band. So I'm pretty much done with the slides because I showed the major culprits, the two culprits that took it the worst. Now, there was two licensing organizations, ASCAP and BMI. ASCAP was American Broadcasting Company, BMI Music, and the Association of Artists. I'm murdering what ASCAP is because I don't see it in front of me. But ASCAP was the larger of the two. And they were leading the show until BMI started licensing the rock and roll. When the rock and roll took over, it beat ASCAP, the old guard, by 3-1. So one would say, is it still going on today? I would have to say that it's difficult to say because now it's corporate. It's just like Vegas. It used to be all mobsters, and now it's corporations that took over. So I would say it'd be very difficult. I would say that in its day, we could blame Ed Sullivan even for taking some form of payola because when an artist went on his show, they became an instant success even if they weren't known. So even as pure as, and I knew Ed Sullivan, as pure as that everybody was taking payola. But they say in modern times, it's very difficult to prove and so forth. Now we go to a point that you brought up about parodies. Because I'm going to name a bunch of parodies of songs that were mocked the payola. But parody is defined as a literary or musical work in which the style of the author or work is closely imitated for comic relief. Section 1, the doctrine section of 107. And here's some of the what's considered fair. The purpose of character for use, including whether such use is for commercial nature or is for non-profit educational purposes. They sort of allow it. The nature of the copyrighted work. Are you infringing on the copyright part of it, which is actually 107. It's the copyright part. We had cases here where the issue was, were we infringing on a copyright, or were we infringing on just mocking the person for libel? The amount is substantially the portion used in relation to copyright, which goes back to abusing copyrights. The effect and use of the potential market for the value of copyrighted work. Now, if you'll just indulge me, while I find, I did pretty good. Oh, I wanted to name some other culprits, and I've met them all. I knew them personally because I'm 77 years old. There was, of course, I mentioned Murder Decay, who I did a show with the Belmonts. He was with Wims. There was also Stan Richards of WILD Boston. And there was Stan Richards of WILD Boston. Oh, and another famous one in his day was Tom Clay. Looked very much like you, sir. Tom Clay, if I showed you a picture, you'd say it's a close resemblance. He was caught up in the payola scandal of the 50s and admitted receiving thousands of dollars for certain records. And he later got fired from various stations. Okay, that would cover, I believe. Oh, let me get, okay.
5 minutes down.
Yes. Payola, some of the payola mockeries. Payola was depicted in the film The Harder They Come, where the record producer does a portrayal of Jimmy Cliff, the reggae artist, as an inspiring musician who was forced to give away his rights to make hit records. In the season 4 of CBS show Cold Case, they showed a payola scandal. And I don't know if you guys remember Johnny Fever from WKRP. Lonnie Anderson was in it, and she was the Vavoom girl of that era. And they did they made it that there was a scandal with Johnny Fever. I forget it. Oh, well, Hessman, the famous actor, Howard Hessman, if you know. There's another Hessman, but this was Howard, sort of a hippie type that took payola. Okay, I went down the line with some sketched out from memory, that I didn't use most of my cards, of the, what do you call it, of the payola scandal. My personal experience, not all payola was by not all payola was done by the record companies and major organizations. A lot of times, us as managers wanted to get our bands ahead. We didn't care about their little royalty. The idea is one hit record, or even what they call the breakout, can mean thousands of dollars as far as you going on the road. They exploded because in the 60s there was no television. Today you can make a star just by using your telephone and video and show it to people and put it on the net. There was no exposure except for a hit record. So to shorten this, twice in my life I try to produce a hit record. I tried to produce one in the 60s like a fool. I put my own money up, lost thousands of dollars, no luck because nothing moved. In the 80s, 20 years later, I think it was late 70s, early 80s, I tried it again with a group, and I had a song written by Roy Bittan from the East Street Band of Bruce Springsteen. How could I miss? I got a top writer. I'm producing it myself. I got all the distribution in New York, all across the country. I even went to Don Imus, and I think he's still around, very famous DJ. Still payola was there. So the last event that I had, I showed you, I did a show with Murray the K, with the Belmonts, and he was accused of payola as well. So every time I tried, I hit the same wall with this payola. Everything gets greased. Now, I don't know how, now currently, I'm doing something with Dr. Sanchez. I'm promoting a Latin American group. I'd have to go through my note. The name is a long Spanish name. We're producing the record through Hoot Records with Dr. Sanchez. And I hope payola isn't still on the forefront. I hope it's just electronic and that we could get a fair play on getting exposure. And I had a guy in my band, I don't know if you might have heard of him. His name is Barry Goldberg. He was a famous keyboardist that went with Stephen Stills from Crosby, Stills and Nash. They're going on tour recently. They're going on tour. He has a group called Rides. Their first initial tour, their record went to number 10. I met him recently, and I grabbed him by the shirt and I said, "Why in all the years that I had you, you couldn't produce a hit for me?" And he just laughed, which shows you that you got to have a lot of bread, a lot of money, and a lot of luck today to have any success in the record business. But I don't think that payola is as bad today. Maybe there's some greasing, but not to the extent that there was in the 50s and 60s. Amen.
Thank you.
Oh, one other thing, and I'll get off this. This record sold for $40 on eBay recently. This record sold, these are online musicians, but other people got the money. This sold for $1,000.
I wouldn't be taking it around here.
No, but it did sell for, I can prove it. And this was the one that I produced on Mazel Records. Mazel in Yiddish means good luck. I didn't have no luck. This is the Roy Bittan song. Went nowhere. So you have to know somebody or have big backing. Amen.